first, I wanted to introduce Erica Brescia. She is the COO and co-founder of Bitnami, the leading provider of packaged applications for any platform. This is very impressive. She heads the company's sales, business development, marketing, operations efforts, and in December 2018, Erica was recognized at the Women Technology Awards of COO of the Year. So pretty impressive. We next have Sid Brandage, who's the co-founder and CEO, Chief Executive Officer of GitLab, which has established itself as the single application for the entire DevOps cycle. As CEO, he has steered the company from show Hacker News to $110 million Series D in 6 years. Pretty impressive. And then lastly, we have Mike Knoop, co-founder and Chief Product Officer at Zapier, not Zapier,
Got it.
Rhymes with happier. This is public service announcement, Zapier. Where he leads the company's product management, UX, and design teams. Under his leadership, the company scaled to $50 million in ARR with 200 remote employees in more than 19 countries, supports 1,500 app integrations, a lot of the Zaps, and empowers millions of customers, including Adobe, InVision, and Spotify. And I'll be your moderator for today. My name's Daylin Simons. I recognized a few friendly faces out there in the audience. I am the Director of Product Marketing for the platform team at Shopify. So let's get right into it. For the audience, when we were doing our introductions, I really like to know what size company that you guys have scaled to. So I wanted the audience to know that, if you don't mind just calling it the name of your company one more time, and then how many employees you've grown to. And Erica, we'll start with you.
We're at Bitnami, we have 75 employees, and we're bootstrapped.
GitLab, we have 575 team members.
And remote.
Yeah, and they're all remote, so in more than 50 countries, no offices.
That makes us look small.
50, wow.
And Zapier, we're about 200, 220, also fully remote across 25 states, 14 countries or so.
Nice.
And profitable.
And profitable, yes.
Yeah, we're actually distributed too. We're in 10 countries, and 30% of our team is remote.
I have a question later related to that's going to be very good for you guys. So to start out, dev tools to dev ecosystem, how you make that transfer. Wanted to better understand how each of your companies has evolved from a single product offering towards an ecosystem. And as part of that, I wanted to hopefully establish for the audience some context about what do you consider the minimum requirements to be able to define yourself as an ecosystem?
I can take it first. So Zapier, when we got started, we were, when it was just Brian Wade and I, my two co-founders back in 2012, we were not an ecosystem. Zapier, we built the first 50 or 60 integrations ourselves. We just listened to what our customers were asking us to build, and we decided to build those. When we launched in summer 2012, we had live chat on the website. It was like Olark at the time, and I remember
We did too.
Yeah, I remember being up for like 24 hours straight, just being overwhelmed by live chat after we'd done our TechCrunch launch or whatever, with users asking, and like, when are you going to support app X, Y, Z? And these were companies and products I'd never even heard of before. And it was really clear at that point that if we were going to scale the company and scale the business and the product, we were going to have to turn into more of an ecosystem, where we built a platform, built a partnership model where folks could build on top of Zapier instead of us having to go build all those integrations ourselves. In order to scale. And so when I think of like the word ecosystem, that's what comes to mind for me is like kind of the word open, I guess. If you have like a standard model in which folks can work with you, I think that's kind of the minimum bar you have to meet to be kind of considered an ecosystem. You know, to paint our story with Zapier, you know, we were not an ecosystem when we were doing all the integrations ourselves, when we were deciding who we partner with and what APIs we work with or what whoever we go, whatever stores we try to get listed on ourselves, you know, that's not ecosystem.
How many Zaps did you build before you opened it up to the ecosystem?
Yeah, like 50 or 60, the first 50 or 60, you know, over the course of about 4 months. Yeah, some late nights there. And then, yeah, after we launched, we opened it up and scaled from that point to 2019 today, over 1,500 that are all built and maintained by our partners.
That's amazing. How about GitLab?
Yeah, so GitLab got started at GitLab version control and GitLab CI to run your tests. And then a person from Poland, Camille, made GitLab CI much better. So we said, oh, that's amazing. We'll make that official. Do you want to join us? He came and he said, we should combine the two applications. And me and my co-founder were like, no, obviously not. Those are separate things everywhere. And he said, well, maybe you don't believe it will be a better experience, but at least believe it's more efficient because we prevent some duplicate work. And that's one of our values, so we did it. And it turned out it was a much better experience for our users. Something we totally didn't anticipate because we had joined the two applications at the hip. Like the integration was as good as you can make it. We made custom APIs, but still having it in a single interface, a single data store, was way better. And we kind of doubled down on that as a company. And today it's everything from planning what you're going to do to monitoring, securing, and defending, and everything in between, packaging, release management. Which was, we still call it our secret. Not that we don't tell anybody, but that people only believe it after they've used GitLab.
And what do you consider the minimum definition to be able to qualify to call yourself an ecosystem, would you say?
Our ecosystem is the contributors to GitLab. Because we have so much scope, we cannot do it all ourselves. And we have over 2,000 people who contributed back functionality to GitLab. And every month there's more than 100 improvements in the product that come from the wider community. And that's something that that's the bar for us to be way above those 100.
So minimum is to have people contributing back.
Yep.
To you. Very nice. And Erica, I loved our conversation about platform earlier and how you define platforms. Can you tell the audience a little bit about Bitnami and how you?
Sure. So, from a platform perspective, I really like this concept of the Bill Gates line, which we were talking about on the call, which is like to call yourself a platform. There have to be companies building on top of your platform that are creating more value than you're getting out of it yourself. And I think that's that's a great definition. And it's important to draw the distinction between a platform and an ecosystem, because you can have a great ecosystem without being a platform. When it comes to Bitnami, I think we're a little different than the other companies represented on stage, because Bitnami is known for this catalog of open source applications that we package and deliver on all of the major cloud platforms. So it's almost like a three-sided market, right? We have users, over 1 million people a month come to Bitnami and acquire applications that they can deploy locally or in the cloud. And then we have these cloud provider platforms that we have to work with to ensure that we deliver a great out-of-the-box experience for running the applications that we package on the platform. And then we have all of the ISVs, or open source projects, whose projects that we're packaging. So when I think about the Bitnami ecosystem, I think about this, like all of these different open source projects with which we engage, and I'd love to see us doing more of that, as well as our user ecosystem, who are pretty involved in what gets packaged next and giving us feedback. So it's not open source in the sense that we don't get contributions, but we still have a lot of active companies and systems integrators and users who are contributing to the direction of Bitnami in the application library.
Can you go into a little bit your statement that you can be an ecosystem without being a platform? Can you double click on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important in an ecosystem that both parties are getting something out of it. So, it might be developers who are contributing and they get something out of it in the sense that they either improve their resumes, or they get a feature implemented, or they might be, systems integrators kind of doing the work and then contributing it back to companies. So there's a lot of ways that they benefit. And I think that's an important aspect of an ecosystem. But I think when you look at a platform, it really is about revenue. Like, is there more monetization happening by all of these other companies that have developed and built on top of you than you're generating yourself? I think again, Bill Gates' line, not mine, but I think it's a good way to think about it.
Nice. So how did you know that you wanted to not only offer your product as a platform, but grow into an ecosystem? Did you know that from the very beginning, or did you kind of stumble in, like, that would be a good idea to open us up? At what stage of the company? I'd like to hear from each of you.
I don't think we did set out to build an ecosystem.
You just need to hire more people so you could multiply that 60 by.
Yeah, I think it, something we learned along the way that we needed in terms of like figuring out when and how. It was often just due to user demand. I think when you're building any kind of ecosystem, you have to have a really good product at the core of it. And for us, we always just were really responsive to listen to what our users wanted and were asking us for. And that's kind of how we got those initial insights in terms of even who to go partner with and who to how to can think about building that ecosystem out and building that platform out. Was based on inbound demand.
We realized later on we wanted to be a company.
Good call.
Dimitri, my co-founder, lived in the Ukraine. He had two things that bothered him in his life. First of all, that he didn't have running water. And second, that he didn't have great collaboration tools at work.
Priorities.
The priority is obvious. He solved the second thing first. And he built GitLab. I saw it a year later on Hacker News. I'm like, this makes so much sense. I sent him an email. I'm going to run GitLab.com without you. I hope you don't mind. He's like, no, totally cool. It's open source. Thanks for making it more popular. A year later, I realized that most people were running GitLab themselves. That's where the market was. And Dimitri tweeted, I want to work on GitLab full-time out to the entire world. So send him an email. We agreed on a compensation. I went to the local Western Union money office. He said, you want to wire money to the Ukraine from the Netherlands? Do you know this person, or is this someone you met over the internet? That's how we got in business.
A beautiful co-founder story.
Yeah, thank you.
That's amazing. So what do you think went well and what was painful about discovering that process, would you say? Were there any bumps along the road that you're like, maybe we shouldn't be doing ecosystem?
I mean, we started out as an ecosystem, our version of an ecosystem from the very beginning, because there was no way with building this application catalog that we could do it and drive adoption and make it successful without engaging with other people. It's painful in the sense that you have a lot of different constituents that you have to think about as you're building out your strategy and making sure that you're doing your best to be, you can't always make everybody happy, but you at least have to make people feel like they're treated fairly and build trust with them. And I think it's really easy when you're building out an ecosystem of any kind, or even just a partnership program before that. It takes a lot of time and investment and care and feeding. And I think, people consistently seem to underestimate the amount that you have to invest in making those relationships successful. I'm not sure if you guys would agree with that.
Yeah, and for us, the big risk is if you start a company based on an open source project, that the two diverge. So one thing we did early on is set out to be very transparent about what we do, and you can still find, like, our OKRs are online, our marketing metric meeting is live streamed to YouTube, like our handbook of over 2,000 pages is online. And it started because we wanted to make sure that we didn't alienate the community. If you can look into a company, you have more understanding, and you can more quickly say when something goes off the rails.
Did you ever have, speaking of pain, did you ever have a pain point when like the transparency was too much? Over transparent? Did anything come back to bite you?
We had small things, but it's been remarkable how little it hurt. And the upside in the ability to hire people that are aligned with your values has been enormous. We got like 13,000 applications a quarter. People just see our stuff and like, yeah, I was already referencing all your stuff. And then at a certain point I was thinking, why don't I just join the company?
When you're at the beginning of your ecosystem journey and you're in the process of choosing your platform partners, we know that platforms and partners are only as valuable as the partners and the enthusiasm of the broader community. So your choice of your first partners is super important. So can you guys talk a little bit about who you chose to focus on and build for first? Like, what was behind that decision making? And then maybe in retrospect, was that the right choice?
We, in the early days with Zapier, before we even had a product, before there was actually software you could use, we had landing pages on our site where it was the classic fill out the form if you want this integration to exist. And for the first 4 or 5 months of the company, that's all Zapier was. So if you went onto Google or if you came across a partnership page and somehow stumbled across Zapier, you filled out that form. Really, the fulfillment process was Brian Wade and I spending all night building that integration and then delivering it to you the next day, like kind of just in time building the partnerships out. And I think that worked really well for us because, like I was saying before, it helped us be really aligned with what our early customers wanted. And it made sure that we actually were building things that users wanted. I think one of the dangers you get into when you start thinking about building partnerships that early in your company is that partnerships can be very, they can kind of blind you to how good the product is because you invest all your effort and time thinking if I can just get that partnership, things are going to go awesome. And you focus all your effort on that, whereas the product kind of stagnates and you kind of pay less attention to the bad parts of the product and pay more attention to the exciting thing on the partnership side. But I think the way we went about it was still a good hybrid approach where we try to align the partnerships that we were building out with what users were telling us, and it's kind of suited the product we were building as well.
In retrospect, was that the right approach, do you think?
Yeah, if I could go back and do it again, we do it that way.
Yeah.
Definitely.
First partners. How about your first partners then?
Yeah,
GitLab.
I think if you're small, partnerships don't make a lot of sense unless you have a very differentiated product. But most of the time, it's a waste of time because no one wants to partner with you because you're nothing. So you spend a lot of time on nothing. Our first great partner was one of our customers. It was like a Fortune 1 company. And I'm a genius at pricing. So I gave them an enterprise license for $1,400.
Great pricing strategy.
One of those people now work at GitLab, and she was like, oh, come on, we had so much money. You asked for this much.
I think we've all made that mistake. Though.
Yeah. And we spent 2 engineering years building the features they wanted. But luckily, the features they wanted were good proxy for features other people wanted, so we lucked out there. One of the things we do now is that we have an open feature request tracker, or we have an open issue board basically, and people just chime in on the features they want, and they can upvote, and our salespeople drop like Salesforce links in there, and our support people drop like Zendesk links in there if there's a support request for that, or if there's a customer who's interested. And then, so the product managers have all the information. And even the engineers sometimes say they onboarded at the company, like, oh, I'm getting all this feedback from this person I can find on the team page. And we're like, that person might not work here. It might just be a user who really cares about the feature, and they tell you what to do.
Yeah, so you're inviting your partners and customers into your roadmap almost. It
Yeah,
sounds like.
exactly. Our real issue tracker where we really work is just open to the world, and it's been amazing. I don't understand why not more companies do it.
Interesting.
It keeps us honest too. Like if one salesperson said to a customer, "Oh, we worked on this week," and he's like, "No, you didn't."
I can tell. Erica, how do you prioritize? I saw some nodding heads in terms of what stage of partnerships is the right one. How do you guys prioritize your partnerships to make sure that it's the right partnership for you at the right stage?
So it's pretty clear for us, and I would say I agree with Sid. Like most of the time when I'm working with earlier stage startups, I tell them to steer away from partnerships because they can be such a huge sink of time, and people get all excited because some big company wants to partner with them, and then they spend a bunch of time and sometimes money, and it goes nowhere.
They really want to acquire them is what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, or suck knowledge out of them, depending on who the company is. But it was pretty obvious for us. So our first really big and important partner was Amazon, and that was just the nature of where the cloud was at the time. And we started building images for Amazon before they launched a marketplace. And so they came to, we were publishing like tens of thousands of images before they launched. So they came to us when they were building out a marketplace and said, hey, we need your help. We need content. We can't go to market with an empty marketplace. We need Bitnami to partner with us. And that worked out fantastically well for us because as soon as we were on Amazon, every single other cloud vendor was like, oh, Bitnami, we need you in our marketplace too because we want to do what Amazon's doing. And that gave us a tremendous amount of momentum and is really what allowed us to bootstrap the company. So, they're partners, but they're customers as well. And so, our approach to partnership from the cloud platform partner perspective is really pretty easy and clear to understand. Like we work with the major hyperscale cloud vendors across the world. And so it's not, prioritizing isn't that hard. And they also have to pay us. So whether or not they're willing to actually fork up the money is a pretty powerful prioritization mechanism as well.
That's a great way to prioritize. Are you going to help me pay my bills?
Can I ask something? That's kind of interesting. So it was kind of a shortcut to trust, if I heard right. Like, do you feel like you'd earned that level of trust yet in the market, or was this kind of a shortcut to getting it.
At that point in time, I would say probably not. I mean, we had trust from ISVs because the Bitnami story is a long one, and I won't bore you with the details now, but we started out packaging ISV software before we launched the marketplace. So a lot of the ISVs trusted us because they had been paying us to do all their packaging before we started doing this. But definitely from a user trust perspective, it made a huge difference. And in the early days, when we were working with we used to work with like a broad range of cloud vendors instead of focusing on the largest ones. And I remember having a conversation with one where we said, if you want to like white label it, and we can talk about that. And they're like, oh, no, we want the Bitnami brand because that means that we're like a real cloud. And we were like, holy cow, that's cool. So yeah, I mean, thanks to Amazon, we got a lot of extra juice.
Nice. You know you've arrived when they want your logo on their site.
I know.
As
That,
a
that
validator.
was really a proud and very cool moment for me, I'll admit.
Very cool. User acquisition strategies. How do you guys decide when it's the right time to partner with other companies? And what model do you use to decide who to partner with?
I think we have a lot of users. There's about 5 million people already using GitLab. So when we do acquisitions, it's aimed at acquiring part of our roadmap, like things we want to build. And there we have a problem because we're a single application, so we cannot acquire some technology and just integrate it with GitLab. It has to be made inside GitLab. So we have a public acquisition offer page. It won't surprise you, but we list out how much we pay per founder, where we're interested, and it has a Google form to apply. And then we get a team that made something before that's really good, but they didn't get enough distribution to succeed. And then they join us, and then in half a year they rebuild it within GitLab. And so far, we've only done a few so far, but it's been a big success. Where one company, Gymnasium, they built all our security offerings within that half year. They had only dependency scanning when they came in, and half a year later they also had container scanning and static and dynamic code analysis.
How about user acquisition strategies for Bitnami?
We look at, we're moving more into the enterprise, and so a lot of our direction there is from what users are asking for. Like we just did a user survey and we had over 19,000 responses, and obviously one of the questions we ask is, what do you want to see next on Bitnami? And rather unsurprisingly, we're getting asked to package a lot of AI and ML applications, and so we kind of take that user feedback, package those apps, do a lot of partnering with the cloud vendors around their own services as well for those types of things. And then that kind of creates this virtuous cycle of driving more user adoption in the areas we're interested in expanding.
So I wanted to change gears a little bit and talk about designing for a great developer and partner experience for your tool, which is important not only for the dev tool, but the dev ecosystem part. So developer advocacy. How essential is having a developer advocate team, a community team, in order to be a healthy ecosystem? And then if you guys could talk about who you think out in the market is doing this well. And then lastly, I really like to find out from each one of you, as your company's organized, what are your opinions about where developer advocacy is best reporting into within your organization?
I feel like this is a question for you, Sid. Like if you've got the biggest developer ecosystem out of all of us.
We see marketing has kind of 3 constituents. So they do kind of buyer marketing to the people that will buy the product. There's user marketing, and there's community marketing. And community marketing for us is the people that contribute to the product. So here we're talking about kind of user marketing, and developers and operators are our users. We've set it up very much as a kind of a giant support desk where people that responds to what's being said on the internet. So basically, if you mention GitLab on Hacker News or on Reddit or on our Twitter feed or someplace, it gets fed into Zendesk, and then we have a team of 3 people that respond to that. Many times they answer themselves, but also they connect with people inside the company. So the relevant person inside the company gets a Slack message, hey, you got to respond here. Someone has a question, I can answer. And that that allows us to be much more responsive. And over time, we added multiple channels. And one of the things we look at is like how fast are we in responding? How many different channels can we respond? How many responses did we get? And do people like the responses? Do they like it? Do they then respond to that? And of course, it's also like when someone writes something great, send them some swag. Make sure you cross-post their blog posts, etc.
Is all of your community marketing, so the developer advocacy within your company is community marketing, because everyone who's having questions is technical in nature and are usually developers?
Yeah, so this is developer advocacy or user marketing. Community marketing is having people contribute to the product. And Ray is doing that, and he's so successful that right now we're backlogged in like responding to all the stuff that's coming in. But he's organizing hackathons, and we have people who are, we call them merge request coaches. So if you want to contribute to the product, we have people dedicated to getting your contribution over the finish line, because there's a huge amount of things you have to comply with before we can accept it.
Nice. And are any of the hackathons like in person, or is all of this done virtually, online?
Yeah, the hackathons are with people that don't work at the company. So by nature, they're online. It's over weekend, and there's swag we send out and live meetings we do online.
Very cool.
Can I make a comment on that? I think Sid has done remarkable things with GitLab, and check out their handbook if you haven't. I've probably sent like 100 people to look at it, because I think it's really cool how you explain everything you do. I don't know that developer advocacy should always roll up to marketing. I think GitLab's unique in how they're organized and also the people that they've hired. I'm usually pretty firmly in the camp of developer advocates should report into engineering and not marketing. Just because of the way a lot of traditional marketing departments work. I don't think that the developer advocates end up well positioned to focus on the stuff that developers really care about. And I think it's really important that there's a super tight feedback loop between developer advocates and the people actually building the product. And to me, that means in most companies, and especially in very large ones, you're much better served, and you'll be able to attract much better talent, quite frankly, if you have people working in engineering, because most developer advocates are folks who have been engineers before and then kind of move into this role, and they tend to just fit much better in an engineering org. Again, like I think what Sid does works really well for them, but I don't know that that's the case everywhere.
The exception that proves the rule.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
And you can't talk about ecosystem without talking about app marketplaces. So Atlassian, Shopify, GitHub, Heroku all have some type of app marketplace. How important do you think it is for users to be able to monetize and get new users via your platform ecosystem?
Shopify's also has its own app marketplace.
Yeah.
Like I guess in my experience, it seems like there's like a pretty natural life cycle for most SaaS companies where after you kind of get initial product market fit, you grow to be a large enough size where you have enough influence, enough customers, and you've created enough value where you get big enough, and to reference back Erica, the Bill Gates line, that you have enough revenue where you can give a small percentage of that revenue out to an ecosystem, and they can build and run their own businesses on it that are meaningful. So I think there's kind of a crossover threshold. I think Shopify is an example of one where when we first got started, it was probably not quite there, and now is well beyond this point where there's a huge app ecosystem where they're able to get partners to create and build integrations and build, attach add-on products and probably create entire companies and like self-sustaining, 1, 2, 3-person shop companies. That's a pretty exciting trend. I think we're still pretty early in the like SaaS ecosystem days, just in general in the history of the internet. I think we're starting to see the first wave of really big companies start to build giant ecosystems, and I think we're going to see a lot more over the next decade or so. I think there's like every app ecosystem that I've seen, they always have different values that they bring. Like if you think about the apps, Apple App Store, Google App Store, Zapier, Shopify, GitLab, Nami, like I think each provide probably a slightly different value, but the thing that seems common when you get to that certain size is they're all providing distribution in some way. And like that's the common thread. So you have to be big enough where, in terms of users or revenue, where you can meaningfully provide some kind of distribution back to the people that are wanting to be in your ecosystem if you want it to be healthy. Otherwise, like they might think that they want to be on your ecosystem, but they're going to realize very quickly, no, this isn't worth investing in, and then your ecosystem kind of decays. So I think it is smart to think about when you want to start going into that based on how big you are and how much scale you have.
Yeah, to add on the Shopify, I think they realized not only we have 2,500 apps in our app store, but when they realized that it was actually part of a growth and distribution model, when we had VCs coming and knocking on our door and asking us about the growth strategy, because a lot of people were quoting Shopify, the app marketplace, as part of their growth strategy, which I thought was really interesting. How about app marketplaces for Bitnami?
I mean, we don't have like an add-on marketplace like Zapier does right now. We are the content, and the value that we deliver is really this consistency that you get. So if you get 2 different apps from us, they're going to be packaged and deployed in a consistent way across all the different platforms you want to support. But I agree with Mike. It's really about distribution, and now we have enough traffic coming through our website that we have people like kind of lobbying to get onto Bitnami, because it not only helps them support all these different platforms, but they know they can get in front of a lot more users. But until we got to that point, it was hard to engage because we weren't worth the effort to engage.
What does the governance look like that for a 75-person company? That can be kind of a heavy lift to make sure that they're all the right quality.
We built a lot of tooling to automate all of this, like a tremendous amount of tooling that we've now productized and taken to the market as its own product. That's our enterprise product.
So here we're going to get to the remote, because each one of you has a super interesting, and this resonates so much with me because hiring in the Bay Area is nutso, right? And I think we can all relate to that. So it's very competitive. And you guys each have a really unique angle on remote work, like the number of countries. What would you say is like the top 1 or 2 tips to making sure your distributed teams and your remote work culture, especially in an age of today where the age of it, you try and fit everyone into one office just doesn't scale, both from paycheck wise as well as real estate wise. So I'd love to hear from you guys about how you guys make remote teams work, and especially across countries and time zones.
I want to take it first. So remote companies are interesting. Zapier, it's fully distributed, 100% distributed, so we don't have a central office. Everyone works from home offices. And one of the things I've learned is that running a remote company forces, like, things you need to do to get good at running a fully distributed company are not things that are unique to running a distributed company. Getting good at communication, having OKRs, having an alignment tool, having ways to clearly define scope and responsibilities, having clear titling and leveling, like all these things are things that every company eventually has to get as they scale in order to like kind of continue growing. I think remote companies and distributed companies kind of force you to think about and pay attention to those things earlier in the life cycle of the company. So when we were only 20 people, we were having to think about how do we communicate? Now that we have a management layer in the organization, how are decisions made? And we had to write all those things down instead of being able to rely on like very implicit processes of hearing people talk to each other in the office and kind of assimilate and absorbing information that way. And I think that actually sets any remote company up for a lot of long-term scaling success too, because you've like institutionalized really good scaling practices much earlier in your company. So I don't think like, yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings I've had running Zapier fully distributed is how much it's helped us scale later on by building those good processes in early.
I fully agree with that. And I think 2 of our values really help. We have a transparency and iteration as values. And the transparency makes things better for the sender and the receiver of messages in the company. For the sender, you can send it once, and then multiple people can get it because you've written it down or you recorded it on video. Also, you don't get interrupted. People can consume it asynchronously. Now, for the receiver, you don't have to interrupt someone else. You don't have to wait to get something. It's out there already. It's the best version that we currently have. It's not some telephone game where you hear it third hand. And then the iteration, if you bite off smaller things and do them quicker, you need less coordination because you're taking a smaller step. It's not so important that it's exactly in the right direction. And because you have less coordination, you have fewer like synchronous meetings that are needed. And you're able to have kind of less overhead and get more velocity out of the same amount of work.
Any tips for remote work? Bitnami?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to address something Mike said, which I think is absolutely true, which is it forces you to document everything and put a lot of structure in place much earlier than you might otherwise do. And what's interesting to me is I've been at a few unconferences where there have been conversations with venture capitalists and also like major acquirers. And one of the things that you hear people say is they don't want to hire remote companies. It's too complicated. They don't really know how to deal with remote work. I've seen that changing a lot in the market recently. But what's funny about it is it's like they should be thinking about all the advantages of hiring a company like that because we're forced to operate a different way and in what I would say a more sophisticated way in many cases because of the fact that people are remote and you need to write things down. And I also agree with Sid's comment about values. Like I've given several talks about how we manage this at Bitnami because we're not entirely distributed, which has its own set of problems. Like we have 2 offices, one in San Francisco, one in Spain, and then we have a bunch of people working all over the world from like Taiwan to Argentina to Europe to everywhere. And it's interesting because I have to explain like when we hire people, we start from before we even hire people at making sure that they have this common set of values that allows people to work together very well, right? We look for people who are great communicators, who team up well, you know, who live all these other Bitnami values. So even when you're pulling people together from different cultures and all over the world, they have this shared set of values that makes it easier for them to operate as a team from the get-go. And that's kind of one of the great unifiers that we use at Bitnami.
How about like a brass tacks question? How do you guys have any time zone? Do you guys talk about like making sure that you at least have 4 hours a day together? Or do you talk about that at all? Or is it fully you work your own work hours?
I don't know about you two. We don't have course set of standard hours at Zapier. That, funny enough, that exact line you used is something that I tell every single candidate during offer calls is like, you know, we don't have course set of hours, but the way that this works is if you can find 2 to 3 hours of overlap with the immediate teammates that you're working with, you'll be fine, you'll be successful. And the company is set up where everyone is in equal footing, so everyone's willing to be a little flexible, right? If I need to wake up early one morning or stay a little later one night, like, you know, I can time flex that, and everyone's in kind of the same boat, so they understand and can empathize with each other on that front. One of the interesting things is as we've gotten bigger, we're starting, I think we're getting to the point, and maybe you are already here, Sid, where we have enough time zone coverage where we can start being intentional about grouping teams together based on time zone. Through kind of the trough of the middle scaling phase of the company, you know, the beginning of the company, we primarily hired out of our networks were in North America, South America time zones, easier to communicate. And then we went through a scaling phase where we have a lot more international, and it's a little tougher. And we're kind of coming out of that other end where we're starting to have enough critical mass and, you know, around the entire world. I like to say the sun never sets on Zapier, where we can actually group together folks in kind of a smart, intelligent way, and that's, you know, also helping alleviate some of the pain.
How do you do that with 50 employees in 50 countries?
Yeah, time zones are the bane of our existence. We have a golden hour where we have some overlap between like the West Coast and Europe, and we have our company meeting then, our group conversation.
What hour is it? Out of curiosity.
It's
8 a.m.
8 a.m.
Yeah.
Pacific.
8 a.m. Pacific?
Until,
That doesn't surprise me.
and the hard thing is, like, we have people in Asia Pacific, and those cannot join. So I'm working on transitioning it to completely asynchronous, but that has been very hard. And we have started to have more teams that are kind of grouped in similar time zones. So we work a lot with stable counterparts, and we make sure that everyone is kind of in Europe or everyone is in the US. So that's been working well. I think still remarkable how much we've been able to do where the company call, it's 5 minutes of announcements and then 20 minutes of breakout calls where you just hang out together with some people. And the group conversation is a department. They have an entire slide deck, but the contents of the call is just asking questions to them based on that slide deck. And those have been working really well, but I need to find a way where we can rotate a bit more so that the people in Asia Pacific also have a chance to participate instead of just asking questions up front and then watching the recording.
Right. Time zones. Okay, we are at our last question before happy hour. we're going to get our crystal balls out and gaze into the future a little bit. So how are you trying to evolve your ecosystem over the next few years? And what kind of problems do you think absolutely can't be solved with a healthy ecosystem?
Well, we have 1,500 integrations apps on Zapier today. I'd guess that's probably 5 to 10% of all the apps that could ever be on Zapier, like given the state of the market right now. So I think the future for us is just continue to grow and grow that kind of percentage to higher and higher numbers, so we can serve more customers who use those tools. And I think that kind of growth and angle kind of makes me think of like what I think ecosystems partnerships are always going to struggle with. Coming back to something we were talking about earlier, is like it's hard to take shortcuts to building an ecosystem. Like you have to have a really good product, you have to figure out ways to scale that and get big enough. At that point, then you can start to really open it up and build a standardized partnership model for folks to like capture some of the value that you've created as a company. But there's no like fast shortcut to that by like magically partnering with Google when you're a 10-person company. It's very rare for anything like that to ever work out, and I think it can mask more problems than it actually benefits. So yeah, I think the real answer there is you just have to stay really focused on building a product that users love, and keep growing it that way. And eventually, then you can layer in partnerships and eventually grow into an ecosystem.
For us, we've continually expanded kind of the scope of the product and do more of the DevOps lifecycle. So I'm really glad we didn't have any very strong partnerships with things that later on we ended up integrating into the product. An ability to partner has been to go deeper. So the foundation on which we're built, so Kubernetes, hypercloud providers, those are organizations we can partner with. So Kubernetes and cloud are now our most successful go-to-market partnerships, and you should think of like VMwares and Cisco's and Red Hats as well.
And what would you say is a problem that you definitely cannot solve with a healthy ecosystem? So it as we were talking about, like documenting things.
I think you're seeing a lot of tools right now that have plugins, and they're starting to break. So if you depend on plugins to add functionality that should really be in your core offering, what you'll find is that over time, your product becomes stale, because as you evolve and as plugins evolve, they break other plugins. So that's a disadvantage. You cannot test the ecosystem, and people become reluctant to upgrade. Your upgrade cycles slow down, and then you're in a whole world of hurt. So never use the ecosystem for something that should be core to the product. If your product should function well with XYZ, you should make sure it's a core part of the product so you can test it and people can feel safe to upgrade, instead of depending on plugins and then trying to have plugins that everyone should have and things like that.
How do you make that call? How do you say this is something that obviously needs to be part of our core offering?
We went pretty much to the extreme where we say, look, it's open source. If you want to make something on GitLab, just contribute it back to the product so that we have the test there. And we have more than, I think, 100,000 tests now in the product. So we make sure that it doesn't break as you upgrade. And that's a better experience for our customers, but also for the people who wanted that functionality in the first place.
And how is your ecosystem going to evolve, do you think, for the next few years? And what do you think ecosystem is not a good Band-Aid for?
So in terms of how we're going to evolve, we actually have a major focus of now starting to onboard commercial applications into Bitnami. So that's a pretty significant change for us. We have been focused up until now on open source and some commercial variants of open source. But now that we've kind of more productized this tooling, we're going to be expanding by bringing on a lot more enterprise commercial applications. In terms of what an ecosystem is not a Band-Aid for, I'd say a great product, but you can't build an ecosystem if you don't have a great product. So, I mean, I think those two kind of go hand in hand, but one of the most important things for sustaining a great ecosystem, I think, is trust. And Sid's response to how they handle this and the integrations, I think, is a great example of that, as being transparent and open about potential challenges and why you're doing the things that you do, and making sure that you kind of stay true to the promises that you've made to your ecosystem when building out the company. if you look at some of the things going on in open source with different projects, like changing their licenses and things like that, there's a lot of great conversations happening, I think, about like how trust is built and maintained and what kind of implicit commitment you might be making around your product, and kind of staying true to that, I think, is really important to maintaining a healthy ecosystem.
Being transparent and making sure you are earning the trust of your ecosystem. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and wanted to thank our entire panel, Bitnami, GitLab, and Zapier, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.